last year's preferred route from Turkey to the Greek islands was largely shut down. According to the international organization,
from five-star hotels to industrial warehouses, Labour's asylum housing gamble that could reshape Britain. Right, let's cut straight through the political waffle, shall we? Before we dive into what might be the most controversial housing policy since the Council Estates of the 1960s, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop for what's coming next because this story is about to get properly messy. Picture this. You're Yvette Cooper, sitting in your Home Office chair, staring at a bill for nearly £1 billion spent on asylum hotels this year alone. £1 billion. That's enough to build 3 new hospitals or fund 40,000 teachers for a year. And what do you have to show for it? A system so broken that even the judges are telling you it's in the public interest to keep housing asylum seekers in taxpayer-funded hotel rooms while ordinary Britons can barely afford their mortgages. So what's Labour's grand solution? Warehouses. Industrial sites. Basically, anywhere that isn't a hotel with room service and daily housekeeping. And before you think this is some sort of Dickensian nightmare, Cooper insists these aren't going to be Victorian workhouses. They're going to be more suitable than hotels, apparently. Though one has to wonder what exactly makes a converted carpet warehouse more suitable than a Premier Inn. But we'll get to that. The announcement came on Tuesday when Cooper, with all the enthusiasm of someone announcing a root canal, told us that the government is exploring industrial sites for asylum housing. When pressed by Nick Ferrari about whether this meant a disused carpet warehouse or something, Cooper's response was a kind of political non-answer that would make a seasoned diplomat proud. We're working with other government departments and local councils to see what some more suitable sites might be. Now, before you start feeling too sorry for anyone involved in this mess, let's talk numbers. The Home Office is hunting for an additional 5,000 properties to house 20,000 people. That's an average of 4 people per 2-bedroom flat. If you've ever lived in London, you'll know that's practically luxury accommodation by modern standards. The difference is these folks aren't paying market rates. You are. And if you think that subscribe button is looking rather appealing right about now, you're not wrong. We're just getting started with this political carousel of chaos. Here's where it gets particularly British in its absurdity. On Monday, 3 appeal court judges, Lord Justice Cobb, Lady Justice Nicola Davies, and Mr. Justice Bean, blocked the closure of the Bell Hotel in Epping because, and I quote, it's in the public interest to keep housing asylum seekers there. The public interest. Not the interest of the local residents who've been dealing with the disruption, not the interest of taxpayers footing the bill, but the public interest of maintaining the status quo. The judges were worried about the upheaval that moving asylum seekers might cause. The upheaval of changing GPS, of relocating, of disruption to their lives. Meanwhile, the locals of Epping, who didn't choose to have their community turned into an open-ended housing solution, apparently don't merit the same consideration for upheaval in their lives. Robert Jenrick, never one to mince words, called it exactly what it was. The entire system has been turned against the British people. And for once, the man might have a point. When judges are more concerned about disrupting the lives of people who've entered the country illegally than they are about the communities forced to accommodate them, something has gone seriously sideways with our priorities. But here's the truly maddening part. And do hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying this descent into political madness. The judges also suggested that Epping Forest District Council could have sought injunctions to prevent protests outside the hotel. Think about that for a moment. Instead of addressing the root cause of community anger, the suggestion is to suppress the expression of that anger. It's like treating a fever by breaking the thermometer. Cooper's response to this judicial roadblock? More of the same measured bureaucracy that got us into this mess. She's promised to set up a new independent organization to handle immigration and asylum appeals, staffed by qualified professionals with safeguards to ensure high standards. Because nothing says efficiency like adding another layer of bureaucracy to an already broken system. The numbers tell their own story. There are currently 51,000 asylum applications waiting to be processed. The average wait time is 54 weeks. That's over a year of taxpayer-funded accommodation, while the system crawls through cases at a pace that would embarrass a Victorian clerk. And during this year-plus wait, these individuals are living in hotels that most working families couldn't afford for a weekend break. Labor has promised to close all migrant hotels by 2029. That's 5 years away. 5 more years of this expensive, unsustainable system while they gradually transition people from hotels to, well, warehouses. It's hardly the change that was promised during the election campaign, is it? Cooper talks about reducing the asylum backlog, but the reality is that under the current system, tens of thousands more people are joining the queue every month. It's like trying to empty a bathtub with a teaspoon while the taps are running full blast. The fundamental issue isn't accommodation. It's a complete lack of effective border control and the perverse incentives created by offering hotel accommodation to anyone who makes it across the channel. The Home Secretary has allocated £500 million for this new, more sustainable accommodation model. £500 million to transition people from hotels to industrial sites. That's roughly £25,000 per person being moved. You could buy each asylum seeker a decent car for less than what we're spending to shuffle them from one form of taxpayer-funded accommodation to another. And speaking of taxpayer money, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you really should be. We're the only ones telling you exactly how your money is being spent while the mainstream media dances around the hard truths. The warehouse solution raises questions that nobody in government seems eager to answer. What happens when these industrial sites become as expensive to run as the hotels? What happens when the same judges who block hotel closures decide that warehouse accommodation is somehow inhumane? What happens when local communities object to having their industrial estates converted into housing complexes? Cooper's promise to increase detention and return capability sounds impressive until you realize we've heard this before. Previous governments have made similar promises about increased deportations and removals. The reality is that most people who arrive claiming asylum, regardless of the merit of their claim, end up staying permanently. The warehouse accommodation isn't a temporary solution. It's likely to become a permanent feature of Britain's landscape. The most telling aspect of this entire debacle is how it reveals a complete disconnect between government policy and public sentiment. While Cooper talks about suitable sites and sustainable accommodation models, ordinary Britons are struggling with housing costs, energy bills, and tax burdens partly caused by the very policies being implemented in their name. The judges in the Bell Hotel case made it clear where their priorities lie. The public interest apparently doesn't include the interest of the actual British public. It doesn't include the taxpayers funding this system, the communities disrupted by it, or the workers competing for housing and services with an ever-growing population of asylum seekers. What we're witnessing is the institutionalization of a system that was supposed to be temporary. Hotel accommodation was meant to be a short-term emergency measure. Now we're moving to industrial accommodation, which Cooper describes as basic and temporary. But in government speak, temporary has a way of becoming permanent, and basic has a way of becoming expensive. The reality is that this isn't really about accommodation at all. It's about the fundamental question of who controls Britain's borders and immigration policy. Is it the elected government responding to voter concerns, or is it a combination of activist judges, international law, and bureaucratic inertia that makes meaningful change impossible? Cooper's announcement about warehouses is essentially an admission of defeat. Instead of addressing the root cause, the continuous arrival of asylum seekers who know they're unlikely to be removed, the government is simply looking for cheaper ways to accommodate an ever-growing population. It's managing decline rather than solving problems. The warehouse solution also raises practical questions about integration and community cohesion. Hotels, for all their expense, at least disperse asylum seekers across different locations. Industrial sites are likely to concentrate them in specific areas, creating de facto migrant communities that may become permanent fixtures in British towns and cities. If you're still with us and haven't hit that subscribe button yet, now would be a good time. This story is far from over, and we'll be following every twist and turn of this policy disaster. The broader implications of this policy shift extend beyond immigration. It sets a precedent for how government handles complex social issues, with expensive, bureaucratic solutions that address symptoms rather than causes. The warehouse policy is likely to be just as costly as hotels once you factor in conversion costs, security, healthcare, education, and all the other services required. Cooper's emphasis on working with local councils to find suitable sites raises another red flag. This suggests that communities will have these facilities imposed on them through the planning process, with little genuine consultation or consent. It's democracy by bureaucracy, where local concerns are overruled by central government accommodation needs. The timeline for closing hotels by 2029 is particularly telling. That's well into the next electoral cycle, meaning this government can make promises knowing they may not be around to deliver on them. It's political accountability, deferred indefinitely. What's most frustrating for many voters is the sense that this entire crisis was preventable and remains solvable, but only if there's genuine political will to address the fundamentals. Instead, we get warehouse accommodation and appeals to judicial delay tactics that prioritize the comfort of asylum seekers over the legitimate concerns of British communities. The Court of Appeal decision reveals how far the legal system has drifted from public opinion. When judges are more concerned about asylum seekers changing doctors than they are about community cohesion and taxpayer costs, it suggests a fundamental misalignment between legal priorities and democratic values. Cooper's promise of new methods for dealing with repeated applications and needless delays sounds promising until you consider that every previous government has made similar commitments. The system seems designed to resist reform, with each attempted solution creating new complexities and costs. The warehouse policy represents the triumph of managerial politics over principled governance. Instead of making hard decisions about border control and asylum policy, the government is choosing the path of least resistance, shuffling people between different forms of taxpayer-funded accommodation while hoping the problem somehow resolves itself. This isn't governance, it's expensive procrastination. And while politicians debate accommodation types and appeal procedures, British communities continue to bear the costs and consequences of policies they never voted for and have little power to change. The real question isn't whether warehouses are better than hotels, or whether appeal procedures can be streamlined. The real question is whether Britain still has control over its own immigration policy, or whether that control has been permanently ceded to international lawyers, activist judges, and bureaucratic processes that seem immune to democratic oversight. Right then, that's the state of play in Britain's asylum accommodation crisis. From billion-pound hotel bills to warehouse conversions, from judicial interventions to bureaucratic delays, it's a system that serves everyone except the British taxpayers funding it. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is only going to get more complicated, more expensive, and more politically explosive. We'll be here to cut through the spin and tell you exactly what's happening to your country and your money. Until next time, keep questioning everything they tell you.